When the grid fails, you have 72 hours before the taps run dry. Not because the water disappears, because the pumps stop, because the treatment plants go dark, because the pressure systems that push water uphill into your apartment building require electricity you no longer have. Most people will realize this on day 2 when the toilet won't flush. By day 3, they'll be fighting over bottled water at looted stores. You won't be there. You'll already know about the source nobody talks about. It's not a secret. It's ignored. Every city has a network of surface water that predates the grid, predates the pipes, predates the entire modern fantasy of turning a tap and receiving clean water. Rivers, canals, retention ponds, storm drains, decorative fountains in public parks. These aren't backups. They weren't designed for you, but they exist, they're full, and when the infrastructure collapses, they become the only water sources that don't require a functioning system to access. The problem is that 99% of the population has been trained to see these as decorations, as infrastructure, as anything except what they actually are, raw material. Here's what nobody tells you. The average city has enough surface water within a 3-mile radius of any given residential zone to sustain a person for months, not comfortably. Not safely in its raw form, but it's there. While people are crushing each other at distribution centers or waiting for FEMA trucks that may never arrive, you could be pulling 5 gallons from a pond at 4 in the morning, treating it in your bathtub, and staying invisible. Visibility is the enemy. The herd moves toward official solutions. You move toward physics. The first thing you need to understand is that treated tap water ruined your threat assessment. You've been drinking chemically perfected water your entire life. It taught you that water is safe or it isn't. Binary thinking. Dangerous thinking. In collapse conditions, there is no safe water. There is only water you can make less dangerous. Every natural surface source contains bacteria, viruses, parasites, heavy metals, chemical runoff, and organic decay. Your job isn't to make it pure, your job is to make it survivable. This is where most people die. They either drink it raw out of desperation, or they wait for a solution that never comes. Let's frame the binary. You can wait in line with everyone else, dependent on a supply chain run by exhausted people with dwindling resources. Or you can identify, access, and treat independent water sources that most people don't even see as options. One keeps you visible and vulnerable. The other keeps you operational. You have time to make this decision now. You won't have time later. The second thing you need to accept is that the sources you're looking for are already mapped. You just haven't looked at your city that way. Open a satellite view of your area right now. Not later, now. Look for blue. Not the blue of swimming pools. Those dry up or get contaminated fast. Look for retention ponds in industrial parks. Canals running through neighborhoods. Rivers and streams, even small ones. Check parks, golf courses, corporate campuses. These places were designed with decorative or drainage water features. In collapse, decoration becomes utility. The golf course pond isn't there to look nice. It's there because it holds thousands of gallons and refills with rain. Here's the part that matters. Most of these sources are visible from the street but ignored by the public. People drive past them every single day and never register them as resources. When the panic starts, they'll run to grocery stores, gas stations, public shelters. They'll wait where they're told to wait. You'll walk half a mile in the opposite direction, fill containers, and walk back before sunrise. The gap between what people know and what people do is where you survive. Now the psychology. Accessing surface water feels wrong. It feels dirty, risky, beneath you. That resistance is cultural conditioning, not survival instinct. You've been taught that real water comes from bottles or pipe. Anything else is for emergencies you'll never face. But you're reading this because you understand that the emergency isn't theoretical anymore. It's a probability with a countdown. The disgust you feel when you imagine drinking from a pond is the same disgust that will keep other people paralyzed while you adapt. Let's talk about timing. In the first 24 hours after water stops flowing from taps, most people will assume it's temporary. They'll use what's in their hot water heater, maybe 50 gallons if they're lucky. They'll ration badly. By hour 48, denial breaks. The stores are empty. The news says help is coming. It isn't, or it isn't enough, or it isn't fast. By hour 72, desperation moves in. This is when violence starts at distribution points. This is when you need to already have your system running, not starting it, running it. If you're thinking about subscriptions or comments right now, you're missing the point, but fine. Subscribe if you want access to the rest of this framework. Leave a comment if you've actually mapped your area, not if you're planning to, if you've done it. The difference between those two things is the difference between prepared and dead. But let's continue. Because the real question isn't whether surface water exists, it's whether you can access it without getting killed for it. Every public water source becomes a conflict zone within 96 hours of collapse. Not because the water is scarce, because people are predictable. They congregate. They wait in groups. They compete for the same visible resources. The pond in the park, the fountain downtown, the creek behind the shopping center, these seem like obvious targets, so they become obvious targets. You need to think one layer deeper. You need the sources that don't look like sources. Start with storm drains, not the ones on the street, the ones that feed into retention systems. Most cities have underground or semi-underground drainage networks designed to prevent flooding. These channels move rainwater from streets into holding areas. In older cities, some of these systems are accessible through maintenance hatches, overflow grates, or access tunnels. I'm not telling you to go into a sewer. Sewers carry waste. Storm drains carry runoff, different systems. Learn the difference now, because in collapse conditions, confusing the two will kill you. Here's why storm drains matter. They refill with every rain event. They're not stagnant. They're hidden. Most people don't even know they exist as anything other than the grate on the curb. Law enforcement and aid organizations won't monitor them because they're not perceived as resources. That invisibility is value. You can access water from a drainage retention pool at 3 in the morning, pull 20 gallons, and leave no trace, no crowd, no conflict, no record. But you need to map this in advance. After collapse, wandering around looking for access points gets you shot or arrested or worse. Right now, you can walk your neighborhood with a dog or a coffee and casually observe. Where do the storm drains lead? Which parks have retention ponds behind fences? Which industrial areas have canals or runoff channels? Take photos. Use your phone's GPS to mark locations. Build a list. Prioritize by distance from your home, ease of access, and visibility. The best source is the one you can reach in under 10 minutes, access without tools, and use without being seen. Next layer. Decorative water features in corporate parks and gated communities. Fountains, artificial streams, koi ponds. These are maintained by circulation pumps and filtration systems that will fail when the power goes out. But the water doesn't vanish. It sits there. And because these locations are on private property, they're psychologically off limits to most people. Trespassing feels like a bigger crime than dying of dehydration. It isn't. You're not looting. You're collecting raw material from an unmanned decorative feature. The ethics don't matter. The water does. Here's the timing problem. In the first week of collapse, security at these locations might still be active. Guards, cameras, residents with weapons, you can't just walk in. But by week 2, if the crisis hasn't resolved, those systems break down. Guards stop showing up. Cameras run out of backup power. Residents either leave or become too focused on their own survival to patrol a fountain. This is your window, not day 1. Day 10 to 14. The chaos has settled into a new pattern. People have claimed their territories. You move through the gaps. Now the part nobody wants to hear. You'll need to carry. Not because you're looking for a fight, because water is heavy and valuable, and someone will eventually decide it's easier to take yours than find their own. A 5-gallon container weighs 42 pounds. If you're moving that distance on foot, you're slow, visible, and vulnerable. You need to understand the routes that minimize exposure. Alleys, drainage easements, access roads behind commercial zones. Never main streets. Never the same route twice. This is where people die. They find a good source, they use it every day at the same time, they take the same path. Patterns are vulnerabilities. Someone notices. Someone waits. Someone takes everything you collected and maybe your life with it. Randomize. Alternate between multiple sources. Vary your timing. If you went at dawn yesterday, go at midnight tonight. If you took the north route last time, take the east route next time. Survival is logistics, and logistics is about eliminating predictability. Let's talk about what you're actually collecting. Surface water in urban environments is contaminated by default. Runoff carries oil, heavy metals, pesticides, fertilizers, animal waste, and industrial chemicals. Biological contamination is almost guaranteed. Bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella. Viruses including hepatitis and norovirus. Parasites like Giardia and Cryptosporidium. You cannot drink this raw. You will get severely ill, possibly fatally ill, and in a collapse scenario, there's no hospital to save you. Treatment isn't optional. But here's the gap in most people's preparedness. They bought a filter, maybe a good one, maybe a Life Straw or a Sawyer, and they think that's enough. It isn't. Filters remove bacteria and parasites. Most don't remove viruses. Almost none remove chemical contamination or heavy metals. You need a layered approach. Sediment removal first, then filtration, then chemical treatment or UV sterilization. Then, if you're smart, a final carbon filter to remove taste and residual chemicals. This isn't paranoia. This is physics. Here's the protocol. Collect water from the clearest, fastest moving source available. Stagnant water is a last resort. Let it settle for an hour so sediment drops to the bottom. Pour off the top layer into a second container, leaving the sediment behind. Run it through a cloth or coffee filter to remove visible particles. Now it's ready for actual filtration. Pump it through your ceramic or hollow fiber filter. This removes bacteria and most parasites. Then treat with chlorine dioxide tablets or iodine. Wait the recommended time, usually 30 minutes. Finally, if you have it, run it through activated carbon to improve taste and remove residual chemicals. This process takes time. It takes equipment, it takes knowledge. And it needs to happen every single time. No exceptions, no shortcuts. One mistake, one batch of untreated water because you were tired or in a hurry, and you're incapacitated with dysentery while the situation around you gets worse. There is no margin for error. The math is simple. You need 1 gallon per person per day minimum. That's for drinking only. If you want to maintain hygiene, cook, or clean wounds, double it. A family of 4 needs 8 gallons a day. That's 64 pounds of water every day. You can't carry that in one trip. You'll need multiple trips or multiple people. And every trip is exposure. This is why most people fail. Not because they can't find water, because they can't sustain the operational tempo required to collect, treat, and store it while maintaining security. So here's the decision you're making right now, whether you realize it or not. You can assume the system will hold. You can hope that aid arrives. You can trust that someone else has a plan. Or you can accept that when the taps run dry, you'll need to have already identified 3 to 5 independent water sources within walking distance, memorize the routes, cache the treatment supplies, and practice the process enough times that you can do it in the dark under stress. One of these positions keeps you dependent. The other keeps you alive. You're not collecting water once. You're running a Shunhuan operation indefinitely, and that's the part that breaks people. The first few days, adrenaline covers it. You're alert, you're careful, you execute the protocol. By week 2, you're exhausted. The routine is grinding, you're making mistakes. This is where the operation falls apart, not because of lack of resources, but because of psychological collapse and operational fatigue. Let's establish the core problem. Water collection in a collapsed environment isn't a task. It's a mission set that repeats every 12 to 24 hours. Each iteration includes reconnaissance, movement to the source, collection, movement back, treatment, and storage. If any step fails, the entire cycle breaks. You get sick, you get caught, you lose your supply, or you compromise your location. The system has no redundancy unless you build it in. Here's the operational framework. You need multiple sources, not one. 3 minimum. Different locations, different types, different access requirements. Source 1 is your primary, closest, and easiest. Source 2 is your backup, slightly farther but still manageable. Source 3 is your contingency, the one you use only if the first 2 are compromised or too dangerous to access. You rotate between them on an irregular schedule to avoid creating patterns. This isn't overcomplicated. This is basic operational security applied to water acquisition. Now the psychological component. Every time you leave your secure location to collect water, you're accepting risk. Risk of being seen, risk of confrontation, risk of ambush if someone's tracking you, risk of injury on the route, risk of exposure to contaminated water if your treatment fails. The weight of these risks accumulates. By day 10, the fear response starts to dominate. You'll begin rationalizing. Maybe I can skip treatment this time. Maybe I can go to the closer source even though people are watching it. Maybe I can carry less so I'm faster. Every rationalization is a step toward failure. This is where discipline separates survivors from casualties. You follow the protocol exactly, every time, regardless of how you feel. You don't skip steps. You don't take shortcuts. You don't let fear or fatigue make decisions. You built the system when you were calm and clear. You execute it when you're stressed and exhausted. The protocol is smarter than you are in the moment. Let's talk about storage, because collection without storage is just wasted effort. You need containers, not one. Dozens. 5-gallon buckets with lids, water jugs, collapsible bladders, anything that seals and stacks. You need enough capacity to store at least 3 days of water at all times. Why 3 days? Because weather happens, security situations happen, injuries happen. If you can't access your sources for 72 hours, you need reserve capacity to survive the gap without panic decisions. Here's what most people get wrong. They store treated water and think they're done. But treated water doesn't stay treated indefinitely. Bacterial regrowth can occur if the water wasn't fully sterilized or if containers weren't clean. Chemical treatments degrade over time. You need to rotate your stored water. Use the oldest first, refill continuously, never let the reserve drop below your 3-day minimum. This is inventory management. Boring, repetitive, critical, and you need to protect it. Stored water is valuable. If someone gets into your location and sees 50 gallons of treated water, they're taking it. You need to cache it in multiple locations if possible. Some in your primary location, some hidden externally in waterproof containers. Split the risk. If you lose your home, you don't lose everything. If someone finds one cache, they don't find them all. This is the same logic militaries use for ammunition and supplies. Distributed storage reduces catastrophic loss. Now the reality check. You're going to lose water. Containers will leak. Seals will fail. You'll spill it during treatment. You'll make mistakes and have to dump a contaminated batch. The plan has to account for loss. If you need 8 gallons a day, you should be collecting 10. The buffer absorbs error. Without it, one bad day puts you in deficit, and deficit creates desperation. Let's talk about the sources themselves and how they degrade over time. That retention pond you identified? In week 1, it's full from the last rain. By week 3, if there's no rain and people are using it, the water level drops. Concentration of contaminants increases. Algae blooms, dead animals. The water becomes harder to treat, maybe impossible with the equipment you have. You need to monitor your sources. If one is degrading, shift to another before it becomes unusable. Here's the environmental factor nobody plans for. Seasonal variation. If collapse happens in summer, surface water is warm, algae grows fast, evaporation is high. If it happens in winter, sources might freeze. Canals ice over. Ponds become inaccessible. You need to think through the calendar. What are your sources in January versus July? If you're in a freeze zone, do you have tools to break ice? Do you know which sources stay liquid because of depth or flow? And then there's contamination events. A chemical spill upstream. A fire that sends toxic runoff into the drainage system. A mass casualty event that puts biological contamination into the water table. You won't always know when this happens. There's no news broadcast, no warnings. You need to visually assess every time you collect. Color, smell, visible debris, dead wildlife nearby. If something looks wrong, it probably is. Move to a different source. Don't gamble. Here's the harsh math. Let's say you're operating perfectly. You're collecting, treating, and storing water with no mistakes. You're maintaining security. You're avoiding patterns. How long can you sustain this? Physically, for months if you're healthy. Psychologically, maybe weeks before the strain starts breaking you down. Operationally, until your treatment supplies run out. Chlorine tablets have a shelf life. Filters have a throughput limit. UV pins need batteries. When those run out, you're back to boiling, which requires fuel, which creates smoke, which creates visibility. This is the collapse within the collapse. Your water system has a lifespan. You need to extend it as long as possible by rationing treatment supplies, maintaining equipment, and having backups for backups. But eventually, it ends. What happens then depends on whether the external situation has stabilized or whether you're in a long-term breakdown scenario. If it's long-term, you'll need to transition to primitive methods. Solar disinfection, slow sand filtration, distillation. These work, but they're slow and labor-intensive. You should know how to do them now, not learn under duress. The final consideration is this. Water makes you stationary. You can't carry enough to be mobile for more than a few days. If you're collecting from local sources, you're tied to that area. If the area becomes untenable due to violence, disease, or environmental factors, you have to abandon your water system and relocate. This is a catastrophic decision. It means starting over. Finding new sources, mapping new routes, rebuilding storage. Most people won't survive that transition. So your location choice matters from the beginning. Don't set up in an area where you'll be forced to move. Pick defensible, resource-rich ground and commit to holding it. Most people think the hard part is finding water. It isn't. The hard part is staying invisible while everyone else is fighting over the visible sources. The moment you're seen collecting water, you've created a problem. Someone knows you have access. Someone knows you have supplies. Someone knows where you're going and when. That information becomes a target on you. Let's talk about human patterns during resource scarcity. In the first 48 hours, cooperation is still possible. People share, people help. By hour 72, that breaks. Desperation overrides social norms. By day 7, if the situation hasn't stabilized, you're in a different environment. Groups form. Territories are claimed. Violence becomes a tool for resource acquisition. The people who were neighbors last week are now competitors in a zero-sum game. Water is the currency, and currency attracts predators. Here's the threat model. You're not worried about random individuals. A single desperate person might beg, might try to trade, might even try to steal, but they're manageable. You're worried about organized groups. 3 to 6 people who've decided that taking is easier than finding. They watch the known water sources. They identify who's collecting. They track patterns. They wait until you're loaded down and vulnerable. Then they take everything, your water, your containers, your tools, maybe your life if you resist. This is why visibility is the primary threat, not dehydration. You can survive 3 days without water. You can't survive 3 seconds of violence if you're unprepared. Operational security isn't optional. It's the difference between running a sustainable water operation and becoming a casualty statistic. The first rule is timing. Never collect during predictable hours. Dawn and dusk seem smart because of low visibility, but everyone thinks that way. Those become the most dangerous times because that's when others are also moving. The actual safest time is deep night, between 0200 and 0400 hours. Most people are asleep. Even desperate people sleep. Lookouts get tired. Patrols thin out. The 2-hour window before dawn is when you move. Second rule is routing. Never use roads if you can avoid them. Roads are channels, and channels are kill zones. They're easy to watch, easy to block, easy to ambush. You want terrain that discourages pursuit. Drainage corridors, wooded areas, spaces between buildings, anywhere that breaks line of sight and limits mobility for groups. You're carrying weight so you can't run, but you can navigate complex terrain better than a group trying to coordinate movement. Use that advantage. Third rule is load management. Carrying 5 gallons at once makes you slow and obvious. Carrying 2 gallons makes you faster and less valuable as a target. Yes, it means more trips. Yes, that's more exposure time. But multiple small trips are safer than one large trip. You're distributing risk across time instead of concentrating it. And if you do get compromised, you lose 2 gallons, not your entire load. Fourth rule is counter surveillance. Before you go to a source, you observe it first from a distance. Sit in the dark for 20 minutes and watch. Listen. Look for movement, light, voices, anything that indicates presence. If it feels wrong, it is wrong. Abort. Go to your backup source. Never commit to a location without confirming it's clear. This takes patience and discipline, and most people won't do it because they're in a hurry or they're tired. That's why most people get caught. Fifth rule is misdirection. If you think you're being followed or observed, don't go directly home. Take an indirect route. Double back. Use terrain to break line of sight, then change direction. Lead them away from your actual location. This is basic evasion, but it requires you to know your area well enough to navigate without thinking. You should have already walked every possible route in daylight, memorized landmarks, identified choke points and escape options. Now let's talk about what happens if you're confronted. You have seconds to make a decision. Comply, resist, or evade. There's no universal answer. It depends on the threat, the location, your physical capability, and what you're carrying. But here's the framework. If it's one person and you're not at your home location, consider giving up the water. It's replaceable. Your life isn't. If it's multiple people or they're between you and your secure location, you have a problem. They might follow you. They might take the water and then come back for more later. This is where things escalate. You need to have already decided your threshold. At what point do you fight? At what point do you run? At what point do you sacrifice the resource to preserve security? If you wait until the moment of crisis to figure this out, you'll freeze or make a panic decision. The answer has to be preloaded. And whatever you decide, you need the capability to execute it. If your plan is to evade, you need to be fast and know the terrain. If your plan is to fight, you need to be armed and trained. If your plan is to comply, you need to accept the loss and have backup supplies. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Most people reading this will never pull a trigger on another human being. The psychological barrier is immense, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be armed. A visible weapon changes the calculus for potential aggressors. They don't know if you'll use it. The uncertainty is often enough, but if you carry a weapon you're not willing to use and someone calls your bluff, you've just armed them. So you need to be honest with yourself about your capability and willingness. Let's talk about what you do if your location is compromised. If someone follows you home or figures out where you're operating from, you have two options: relocate or fortify. Relocation means abandoning your water stores, your setup, everything that's not portable. It means starting over in a new location with new sources. It's catastrophic, but sometimes necessary. Fortification means defending what you have, which requires resources, manpower, and a willingness to use force. Most individuals can't sustain a defensive posture alone. You need a group, which introduces its own problems. Groups mean more mouths to water. Groups mean trust issues. Groups mean internal conflict over resources and decision-making. But groups also mean shared labor, shared security, redundancy if someone gets sick or injured. The question is whether the benefits outweigh the costs. In most scenarios, a small, trusted group of 3 to 5 people is optimal. Larger than that, and coordination becomes a problem. Smaller than that, and you don't have enough coverage for security and operations. If you're operating solo, you need to accept the limitations. You can't maintain 24-hour security. You can't be awake and alert at all times. You need sleep, which means vulnerability. This is where cache supplies become critical. If someone raids your primary location while you're asleep, you lose that cache, but you have others. You survive and adapt. Here's the final layer: deception. You want people to think you're struggling just like they are. If you look healthy, if you look clean, if you look well hydrated, you're advertising success. Success makes you a target. You need to look like you're barely surviving. Dirty clothes, lean appearance, slow movement. You're camouflaging capability behind the appearance of weakness. This is psychological operations applied to personal security. And you never, ever tell anyone about your sources. Not friends, not neighbors, not family outside your operational group. Information is a vulnerability. The moment someone knows where you're getting water, they can use it themselves or sell that information to someone else. Operational security means accepting isolation. It means lying when asked. It means watching people suffer and not helping because helping exposes you. That sounds cruel. It is cruel. It's also survival. We're at week 3 now in this scenario. The initial panic has burned out. The weak have already died or been absorbed into larger groups. The strong have claimed territories and resources. The situation has stabilized into a new equilibrium, one where water access determines survival and power. You're still operating, still collecting, still treating, still invisible. But the environment is changing around you. Here's what happens in extended collapse. The easy sources dry up or become so contaminated they're unusable. The retention ponds are thick with algae and corpses. The decorative fountains are empty, pumps long dead. The storm drains are known and guarded. What was invisible is now mapped by everyone who survived the first 2 weeks. The operational space is shrinking. You need to adapt or you'll be forced into the same conflict zones as everyone else. This is where knowledge separates you from the herd. While they're fighting over the last accessible pond, you're looking at sources they don't recognize as water. Rainwater harvesting from rooftops. Condensation collection from HVAC units that still have residual moisture, groundwater from shallow wells or hand-dug pits. Even morning dew collection from vegetation if you're desperate and know the technique. These aren't primary sources. They're gap fillers. But in week 3, gap fillers become survival. Let's talk about rainwater specifically. Every rain event is an opportunity to collect hundreds of gallons if you're set up correctly. Rooftop catchment is the most efficient method. Water flows into gutters, gutters channel to downspouts, downspouts feed into storage containers. The first gallon from any roof is contaminated with bird droppings, dust, chemical residue from shingles. You divert it. After that, the water is relatively clean compared to surface sources. Still needs treatment, but it's a better starting point. The problem is infrastructure. Most people don't have gutters anymore, or they're broken, or they don't have containers to catch the volume. You needed to set this up in advance, cutting downspouts, positioning barrels, sealing connections. If you're doing it after collapse, you're working with improvised materials, duct tape, and plastic sheeting, and your collection efficiency is maybe 20% of potential, but 20% is better than zero. Here's the timing factor. Rain events become critical resupply moments. You need to drop everything and maximize collection. That means exposing yourself during the storm, setting up additional catchment, monitoring overflow. Rain also means other people are doing the same thing. Visibility increases. Risk increases, but you don't have a choice. You either collect during the rain or you go without until the next event, which might be days or weeks depending on climate and season. Now the long-term problem. Your treatment supplies are running low. You've been operating for 3 weeks. If you were smart, you stockpiled a 6-month supply of chlorine tablets, replacement filters, fuel for boiling, but even 6 months runs out eventually. You need to transition to methods that don't rely on consumables. Boiling works but requires fuel, and fuel is scarce. Solar disinfection works but requires clear bottles, sunlight, and 6 hours of exposure. Slow sand filtration works but requires construction and maintenance. Let's focus on solar disinfection because it's the most practical, long-term method. You fill clear plastic bottles with filtered water, remove air bubbles, and place them in direct sunlight for 6 hours. UV radiation from the sun kills bacteria and viruses. It's not perfect. It doesn't remove chemicals or heavy metals, but it makes microbiologically contaminated water safe to drink without consumables. The catch is that it requires clear bottles, which become valuable trade items in extended collapse. And it requires sun, which means it doesn't work in winter or during prolonged cloud cover. Here's where people make mistakes. They think solar disinfect.